Welcome to Global Risk Community Chat. Today, our guest is Donna Dupont. I'm very happy to have you here today, Donna. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here.
Likewise. So, before we jump into our topic, can you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, I'd love to. So my name is Donna Dupont. I'm a former emergency management professional. I used to work for the government, the provincial level, and in health emergency management. And now I'm working in foresight and design and innovation. And I work with organizations, governments, and different agencies around the world, really helping leaders adapt to a changing environment and try to make decisions under times of really deep uncertainty.
Sounds good. So, thank you so much for this short introduction. So, from my understanding, we are talking about foresight today for the most of it. So, how would you describe foresight? What does it exactly mean in your words?
Well, it's a good question because there's a lot of different ways people describe foresight. For me, I like to keep it simple. So for me, foresight is really a forward-looking approach to strategic planning. It's very different from other dimensions of planning that might look at the past or it might look at what's happened, before or what we've learned. Those are important elements too, but foresight is really looking at what's changing in the environment, what's new, what's different, and how is that challenging our assumptions. And really, the idea behind foresight is to challenge status quo thinking, challenge business as usual. And it's really a tool to cultivate different types of conversations so we know how to adapt in a changing environment and even transform and innovate too. So that's really what foresight is all about. And it's quite complementary to a lot of different tools and methods that are out there. You just need to know how to integrate them with an intentionality when you use them.
Sounds great. Thank you. Because I imagine that, it's a word that is, I see it often used in a lot of the industries, but, just so that we are clear on that we are agreeing on the description, I guess. So what are some key things or, key benefits of foresight?
So foresight is really a discipline in anticipatory thinking. And there's a lot of different ways that we anticipate, and risk management professionals anticipate as well. They anticipate risk and they work to understand it, then mitigate it so that this way it doesn't impact their projects or different initiatives they're working on. It's similar. So the benefits of foresight is really giving you a larger lens into what is happening in the changing landscape. So it's a bit of an external lens in traditional strategic foresight because it's strategy focused. So you're looking at the broader context so it's not necessarily just specific parameters that you're forecasting. You're looking at what's changing in the bigger landscape. And so the benefit of it is that you understand how the global system, the larger system is changing, those shifts, those patterns, and then you can start to ask different questions, right? In terms of how does the geopolitics and the new economic shifts and the environmental shifts come together in a way that we've never experienced before? And what does that mean for the industry we're working in or the organization we're working in? And so that's the benefit is that it really gets you to think more proactively and forward looking, right? So that's the big benefit because it allows you to not only go there and think about it, but also have different kinds of conversations. You can move your insights, your information, your research into very interactive engagements where you're having strategic conversations with a lot of different experts to really understand how do we do things differently in this environment. And the benefit is that you have a lot of opportunity to get new ideas, not just independently, but as a group. And so you can tap into that collective intelligence and those ideas you can take action on. And so that's the value in a changing environment, is that you really need to be aware of what's changing and you need to adapt so that you are future ready or future fit. And that's terminology that a lot of organizations are using. The military uses fit for purpose. So you want to make sure that you are also changing for the changing environment.
Great. And as far as I remember, you kind of mentioned that, risk assessments or risk management is kind of similar. You said they are a bit similar, but I'm actually interested in learning what are some differences when it comes to, like risk assessment predictions or, like probability assessments versus, like foresight.
Yeah, so they both embrace the principle, that concept of anticipatory thinking, right? So that's where they share the commonality. And so they're interested in the future for different purposes. So, and there's different time horizons. So when you think about traditional risk assessments, and I did this when I was in my former role in emergency management, a lot of times you would have to do these very large risk assessments on all different kinds of hazards and understanding what it means in terms of exposure, vulnerability, coping capacity to come up with risk assessments. So, but those helped for planning. So where the two are similar is that they're really trying to understand the future, right? But with a risk assessment, typically it's more of a forecasting mindset. We call this deterministic kind of thinking. And essentially what it uses is more the past of the past trends, past evidence of change, to predict the future, right? We're trying to predict usually, and there's usually a probabilities attached to it. We try to quantify it in risk assessments to prioritize which ones we should mitigate first, because there might be a whole host of risks and we can't tackle them all. If we have limited resources, we have to be strategic on which ones we're going to prioritize. So there's an understanding that, yes, you want to quantify, and there's a lot of value in really taking the evidence and what we've learned from the past. And even if we can integrate what we're seeing with experts today to help make those those quantified, that's helpful. But typically with risk assessments, it's you're able to forecast based on some information, and the variables are typically they're static, meaning that they're more predictable, right? That's why we can forecast, right? But today's world, there's a lot of unpredictability. There's a lot of variables that are very dynamic, and they don't exist in like in a neat package, right? So risk assessments, very much a linear approach, right? We're predicting the future. In strategic foresight and those that work in professional futures, we don't predict the future. We try to understand the landscape of change, right? We're understanding what's changing, what's emerging, and what that could mean. So it's not predicting, so it's not probabilities, it's more what's plausible
Mhm.
based on what we've experienced from the past, what we know is changing in the present, and how we may anticipate things may unfold if we take this action or we don't take this action, or if two things come together in a way we've never experienced before. So it's a different mindset. So risk management, risk assessments, very forecasting, linear, it's using data from the past to project. It can be very helpful for sure, because we want to integrate the knowledge we have. But where the two differ dramatically is how they engage with uncertainty. So with risk management, we don't like uncertainty. Do not like uncertainty. In fact, we try to, where there's uncertainty in the risk, we want to mitigate the uncertainty, eliminate the uncertainty so that we have more confidence moving into the future. And I think that makes a lot of sense if you're applying risk management to projects or initiatives. You want to de-risk them because you want to be successful. So I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're doing different types of risk assessments to understand global context, it's very difficult to apply because there's so much change and it's hard to predict. And and sometimes if you have like change in geopolitics, very unpredictable leadership, it's even harder because, that's the nature of those types of the dynamics in the system. But with foresight, we're actually going to dive into the uncertainty. We're going to embrace the uncertainty. And so where forecasting stops, where risk assessments stop, foresight can pick up and say, okay, what are the things that we don't know? What are the things that are changing that we've never experienced before, but we see these as weak signals of change, emerging issues that we think can potentially become disruptive. And that's where foresight comes in because we can jump into the uncertainty and we can start to use methods to help advance conversations that will give us new intelligence, new insights for the future. And that's all about adaptation. It's adaptive strategies, but more longer term versus risk short term. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. In a way, like how I'm gathering is also that foresight sounds a bit more, I guess, like a broader overlook compared to, like risk assessment being more straightforward, maybe more of goal focused. But I also, what I think is, like from what I gathered at least, foresight can be a very useful tool to turn risks into opportunities almost, to be, like future proof, as you have mentioned. And with that being the case, I'm considering our audience is mostly, risk managers. How would you, like what would be some of your maybe takeaway points as for our, as for these professionals to maybe, start implementing some foresight, or how they can deal with uncertainty better, but also, like this kind of strategies in mind?
So you're absolutely right in terms of foresight being this opportunity to have a broader look and to really think about opportunities for innovation, for adaptation, for transformation. This is what it's really, truly about. And especially if you are going in with that intention, then you can make sure your processes are lined up so that you really do get into that type of conversation. So for those that are really interested in learning foresight, and it took me a while because it's a shift in mindset. You're kind of moving from, risk management, forecasting is a little bit of a fixed mindset, meaning, when a risk happens, you want to return to status quo, you want to return to baseline, you want to eliminate the risk. Foresight is a growth mindset. So it's different because you are really moving into the change. So for those that want to really balance the two, and I think you need both in today's world. Organizations need both, right? Because you have day-to-day operations and risk management's part of day-to-day management and operations, right? So you need that in order to make sure that you can keep things running today. But you also need part of your team, or maybe it's a dual role you have, right, where you are thinking to the future. So for that, you want to start with simple tools to start to expand your lens. And I usually start where people are. So if you're very much a forecasting mindset, you want to start to embrace what's changing. And I think the easiest thing to do is what I like is this frame called the three horizons. And for me, because it really signifies three different mindsets across three horizons. So and it helps you to understand change. So I'll explain it very simply because it's something that you can Google and you can take a look. And there's workbooks, available on the website, and there's different tutorials that speak of how you can use this method. But it's a really great basic. Well, I wouldn't even say basic. It's a simple tool, but it's quite profound in terms of how it's going to help you understand change, right? So it starts with the first horizon. And the first horizon is the management paradigm. It's the day-to-day business operations. It's the tactical thinking. It's the risk management. It's keeping everything kind of moving, right? So it's today. And it's really important. But what you want to do in that frame work is it kind of challenges you to take a look at what are some of the things in your day to day that are kind of no longer as influential. They're kind of shifting, they're changing, right? And there may be a pattern that's not as relevant to today's landscape or today's business. So you want to see what that is, but also what's new. What are some weak signals of change? What are some new things that are happening today that we say, oh, that's interesting. I know that's important, but I don't know how that's going to affect my business or my work. That's you're probably tapping into a weak signal. And technology tends to be one of those things when something new comes on the scene. We're interested, we're curious, but we don't know what it's going to look like or how that can transform. So because it's a weak signal of change, but it's going to evolve over time. So that's the first horizon. And then you move into the second horizon. So as things are changing, you are going to see weak signals of change, right? So things that we've never seen before, emerging issues, new emerging issues that we've never dealt with before because we're dealing with a complex dynamic system. We're seeing the interplay of different things, and we see now potential for disruption. That is horizon two. And you can start to train your mind to look for these things in your day-to-day work, or when you read articles, you can think back, are these things I'm seeing, are these emerging issues relevant to the work I do? Are these signals of change, new potential, new opportunities? So why I love Horizon 2 and disruption is that on the other side of disruption are opportunities for innovation, right? Because it disrupts the old way of being, the old way of thinking, the status quo. And you could look at disruption as a threat, which it can be a threat, a risk that you might need to confront to mitigate, especially if there's lives at stake or there's, the risk is significant. But on the other side, there could be some opportunities that you can leverage through that change, maybe new ways of doing business, new ways of being more efficient, new roles, new capabilities moving into the future. These are the things that you want to balance risk with opportunity. So and sometimes disruptive scenarios are the best tool to trigger people and to kind of shake them a little bit in terms of this is the world. How would you operate in, a world that was this disruptive? And that's why foresight scenarios are so popular, to really create this bit of distance between today and the day to day and a potential future that could be disruptive, right? To kind of get us thinking innovatively, but also what we need to confront, but how we need to innovate. And then the third horizon is about transformation, right? It's the visionary, it's that big thinker, it's those people that have a big vision of transformation that's 10, 20 years, maybe 30 years into the future. They're thinking long term. And usually visionaries, the vision is something that's more aspirational. But what you can do is with visions, you can start to think about what are those things that we can leverage to help create a pathway to achieve that vision. And so those are very important mindsets, the innovator mindset, the visionary mindset, but it's all moving towards change. So this is a very interesting frame. It's one of my favorite tools to start to think about the future in different ways and think about change, and not to be afraid of change, but to embrace it, to embrace the uncertainty and start to ask different questions of what if? What if this happened? What would we do? How would we have to change or operate differently, right? Maybe we have to mitigate different things, but maybe there's new opportunities to do things differently. And so you want to bring your team together and have an opportunity to brainstorm. And you might be surprised at what new ideas might come out of those conversations that might open up new, different pathways for you in your work, in your projects, in your business. So that would be my starting point for anyone. And it's one of my favorite tools, as I said.
Thank you so much for explaining that as well. And with that, that was actually my last question. So, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think just to close, I know that, coming from the risk management, emergency management world, it took me a while to really understand the mindset of futures and how a futurist thinks and how a strategist thinks and how a future strategist thinks. It's very different because it's all about how you move in a changing environment. And that can be really challenging for those that are very analytical or very risk focused. They're very much looking for evidence. So I would just encourage people, still hold on to that important mindset of evidence and knowledge, because that's important, right? The science, the knowledge, what we know, how that knowledge might be changing, things like that as we are uncovering new discoveries, new information, but also tap into different ways of generating strategic intelligence. And don't be afraid to play with uncertainty. Start small on small things, right? Start to look at trends, that are changing, that are important to the work that you do.
Thank you so much. And with that, we have kind of run out of our time. So I want to thank you so much once again, Donna, for giving your insights, your expertise on this topic, because I think especially when it comes to risk management, as you said, change is not often, I think, like talked about. It is somewhat of a challenging topic, I think. So thank you so much. And yeah,
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invite.
likewise.